Well, good Wednesday to you again. Rodney here with you. So glad to be with you today, and thank you so much for joining me, whether it's on Wednesday evening when this airs or if it's later in the week. So glad you're taking the time to tune in and to have this Bible study together. As always, it's a joy to bring it to you, and we are still meeting in person here at 7 o'clock tonight, so I'll be able to kind of rehearse on you and then share this lesson with those in person later this evening. So not a lot to update this week. Got a few people that are battling some things, and of course the virus is still around us, and we do know some people that have the virus and have been in contact with it, and so that's that's concerning and something that we need to keep praying for and pray that this can end very soon, that we can find some solutions to it and be able to battle it. We have our teachers are back at the school buildings now, and so that's certainly something to be praying for. And our kids are planning to go back in a hybrid model beginning next Monday. Of course, some school districts have already begun classes. We had some move into Freed-Hardeman this week, and so just a lot of things going on, and trying to carry on as safely and as using as many precautions as we can. So I hope you're well, hope you're safe, and I hope everybody in your world and in your life is doing okay. I mentioned last week in our study together on the importance of singing that we've got a big study coming up, and it is a study on the end of time. And I have continued to analyze and to look at the various elements of the end of time that I feel are needed to be discussed, that will be helpful to us as we study this together. And so I just want to, by way of introduction, mention a few of those to you. We're going to begin by looking at some material or events that lead up to the second coming or the end of time. We're going to then look at the nature of the end of time or the second coming, the nature of the world, the nature of the things around us. We're then going to look at the events themselves of the second coming or the end of time. And all through this study, these maybe as many as 8 or 9 weeks, I'll be using the second coming of Christ and the end of time. And I guess maybe we start by just defining some things and talking about some parallels. I will use those parallel to one another. So if you hear me say the second coming, then you know I'm talking about the end of time. I do believe that those events will occur together. And as we study this more thoroughly in the weeks to come, I think I will be able to help you see why I feel that way. But I do believe that the end of time and the second coming are one and the same event. But there are other events that are going to accompany that occasion. And so what are they? And so we'll look at some of those events, even to include some events that I'm not sure that I can find in the scriptures. Yet they are being taught, and some of them may be in principle in the scriptures, or some of them may be misapplied scriptures. And so I want to handle all of those as humbly as I know how, as lovingly as I know how. But I do think there will be some things that come up that have been taught maybe for years that are just I'm not sure are founded in biblical interpretation, at least not in accurate biblical interpretation. And I realize by saying that I put what I interpret the Bible to say into some higher category, if you will. And I'm not trying to imply that, though you may receive it that way. What I'm simply trying to do is understand what the Bible says and use the Bible to be its own commentary. And so we'll look at other passages as they relate to these passages and remember that the Bible cannot contradict itself, or the Bible cannot say something in one place and then say something in another place and mean two different things. God is not the author of confusion, and there are a lot of wise people out there, and I own several commentaries. You see a set right over my shoulder there in my bookcase. If you could see my entire office, you would see other sets of commentaries. So there's a lot of scholarly people out there, and some of these commentaries, including the one you see behind me here, were written by men who were very educated in the Scripture, but I can tell you that there are things in those books right there that I don't agree with, and that would be the case for all commentaries. And so I want you to understand that just as one student of the Bible, I'm trying to allow the Bible to speak to me, and I'm wanting to impart some of that to you as best I know how. And by all means, if there ever were to be a question, you're more than welcome. 931-851-9181, the number to the office here. I'd love to discuss any of this with you if it would be available for us to sit down in person at a distance and keep precautions in place. I would be glad to read this together and think about it together. And I will be just up front with you. If I don't know, I don't know. And even in our study together in the next few minutes, I'm going to bring up some questions I don't know the answer to. But there are some events that are connected to the second coming or the end of time. Events like the resurrection. Events like the transformation of our bodies. Events that some would teach about the rapture and where does that all come in. Or events like the millennium, and what do we make of the millennium, and how should we view the millennium? Is there a millennium? Is there a rapture? Is there a transformation? Is there a resurrection? The judgment. What's the judgment going to look like? Had a lady just yesterday ask me about the judgment, and when I die, am I not already going to be judged? So why is it at the end of time that there is a judgment day that is spoken about? And we worked with that question just a little bit. And so there are questions like that, that when I die, do I know my eternal destiny? Yes. Am I in my eternal destiny? And I would kindly suggest no, that there is a realm out there of the dead that is in waiting, but they understand their eternal destiny. And so we will end this whole study by talking about heaven and hell, which are the eternal destinies of the soul. And there's only two options, as there is with the Hadean realm, as we often refer to it. And so we'll kind of talk about, well, what if I die before the end of time? What can I expect? And then ultimately, when the end of time does occur, when the second coming does occur, what can I expect then in heaven and hell? Obviously, in the meantime, we would call it paradise or Abraham's bosom or a place of torment, Hades maybe, for that of punishment and destruction. And so, what are some events before the second coming? And we want to think about that a little bit. One of which that has been highly taught is the Battle of Armageddon. And what I think we need to begin by asking ourselves is, where do we get the backing for the Battle of Armageddon? I know that's popular in our culture. I know it always has been. I know it's popular in our movie series. As we have a movie and people have watched the movie. And so, but is that a political military battle or is it a spiritual battle? And I'm not trying to pick on anything. I'm just simply bringing up something that I think you might be aware of and just try to cause you to think critically about it. Does the Bible speak of a battle of Armageddon? If it does, what does it really have to say about it? And I don't know if we'll get there this evening or not for time's sake, but Revelation 16 is where that's going to come up. Is Israel important here? You know, we hear a lot of talk about Israel and about the country of Israel and about preserving Israel, and a lot of our political decisions and world alliances are made because some people believe in the geographical, political country of Israel, or is it a spiritual Israel that is referred to as the victorious, conquering one? And so you've got, the Battle of Armageddon, just as one of the events that will lead up to the second coming, or the nation of Israel. What do we make of the Battle of Armageddon? Do we call that a political battle or a military battle, a war, like a fight, or do we call it a spiritual battle, a cosmic battle, a good and evil battle? The same way with Israel, thinking about Israel. Do I need to get to Israel before the end of time and be in the country, the geographical location of Israel? Is God going to preserve that land? And so I need to be there when the end of time comes. And so I want to know the events as they occur. I'm fully capable of getting on a plane, flying my family to Israel, and dwelling in Israel. I'm not saying I want to. I'm not saying I advise that. I'm simply saying that if that is how I understand the preservation of Israel as a nation, as a geographical, political boundary there, then I need to do what I can to get inside of that. Or could it be that the Israel referred to is a spiritual Israel, meaning the opportunity to be worldwide? It has nothing to do with a geographical location, but it has everything to do with a spiritual location. How we determine that, how we decide that debate, will affect where we stand on a lot of things as it relates to the second coming. And then there are just some things that I think have been taught that people have just accepted without further critical thinking. And so tonight is just to kind of set the bar and to kind of to lay out the program here. And I want to encourage you to stay with me all the way through. I hope it'll be interesting. I hope it'll be enlightening. I hope it will give you some foundation to be able to defend God's Word. And the questions and the reasons why this is all coming up is because the technological world, the social media world, is full of posts about how the virus is one of the plagues that God is sending to enact the events leading up to the second coming. Well, here's what I'll tell people. If you'll give me the opportunity to hindsight, I'll be right every time. But I don't have the opportunity to hindsight with this, and neither do you. That means that when the second coming, when the end of time occurs, that'll be what it'll be. And then at that point, we can look back and we can say, oh yeah, there you go. Okay, that happened. Yep, perfect. That happened. Yep, perfect. Okay. And maybe it is that we can tie this prophecy into that prophecy, and draw all this big picture together. I know a gentleman who has written 2 books now on how prophecy ties in, and you take the Old Testament prophets and you put them in to the prophecy and the prophetic language of the book of Revelation, and you put all this together and you can explain everything tooth and nail. Well, I think we got to be careful with that, because God has made it clear that He is going to keep some things from our understanding. And I've got to be okay with that. I've got to be able to say there are some things that I don't know. Those are in the God realm. And so only God knows. So it's okay for me to say I don't know. I'm not going to use that as an excuse to be lazy and quit studying, but I'm simply going to admit the fact that God's ways, God's mind, God's ability are higher than mine. And I'm also willing to admit that God has reserved some things just for His knowledge that He never intended for me to understand in the first place. Now, I don't think that applies at all to salvation. I don't think that applies at all to forgiveness. I don't think that applies at all to the eternal destiny of man. I think all of those have been revealed. I think they're fully understandable. I'm not suggesting that God has kept things from us that we need to know. But when it comes to the end of time, like I said last week, I'll be able and you'll be able one day to look back and say, aha. We'll have all of these aha moments, but at that point it won't matter. And so ultimately, what matters with the end of time is that you and I be prepared for it, that we be ready for it. And if we find out that this event does occur, then okay, great. Or if we find out that that event don't occur, okay, great. It doesn't matter either way in terms of the events and the chronology of things that lead up to it. Now, what will matter is where we stand when it occurs in terms of our eternal destiny. And that's where we'll close. But trying to connect all of these prophecies and put all these dots together and create this timeline, and that's not my purpose here. As a matter of fact, Numbers 12, verse 6. Numbers 12 and verse 6. Allow me to read from the English Standard Version. And he said, the Lord said, hear my words. If there is a prophet among you, I, the Lord, make myself known to him in a vision. I speak with him in a dream. Not so with my servant Moses, verse 7. He is faithful in all my house. With him I speak mouth to mouth, clearly, not in riddles, for he beholds the form of the Lord. Now, why would I take you to Numbers 12, verses 6 through 8? I simply take you there to point out the fact that God spoke to the prophets in riddles. We would call that figurative language. We would call that symbolic language. And so all of these prophecies do not need to be taken literally, just like the book of Revelation. We need to understand we call it the Apocrypha genre of Bible literature. And it's a code language. And God says, I've been speaking to the prophets in code language, and I always will. But not to Moses. Obviously, he's making the contrast of speaking directly to Moses. And so whatever Moses says, it is word for word. It is idea for idea. But with the prophets, I'm speaking in riddles. John in the book of Revelation speaking in riddles, speaking in figurative language, speaking in symbolic language for a purpose, for a reason. In Hosea, chapter 12 and verse 10, God says, I spoke to the prophets. It was I who multiplied visions, and through the prophets gave parables. Okay, God is speaking through the prophets in parables. Jesus spoke in parables as well, right? And so we need to be careful to take all the information and just associate it literally with what is said, because sometimes it may have never been meant to be understood literally. Or we need to be careful to think that just because Isaiah said something 700 years before Jesus lived, that what Isaiah had in mind was the United States of America in 2020 on August the 5th. Now, it may be that that's the case, but don't automatically read the Old Testament prophecies and apply them directly to your situation, because your situation may not be implied at all. Now, did God know about America in the days of Isaiah? Sure. Did God know that America was going to be founded? Sure. I'm not suggesting at all that God doesn't know or can't see the future. I'm just simply saying that some of the things that the prophets shared, including John in the book of Revelation, was for the people right then and right there, and has no application to you or me, or certainly no tie to the end of time. And I think it's important that we understand that and not try to make everything so literal within the scriptures. Now, we want to do some good exegete. We want to do some good interpretation before we do our application. And oftentimes, what happens is we read a biblical text, we apply it to our situation and our circumstance before we ever interpret what it meant when it was originally said. And what we forget is that the Bible can never mean something it never was meant to mean in the first place. And it's important that we be reminded of that in this study of the end of time. Do we get caught up emotionally? Sure. Do we get tied in to all of the cosmic superhero type Hollywoods? Sure, we do, because we live in that world. But what we need to realize is that some of this is figurative. Some of this is symbolic. Some of this is in riddles. So I want to take you to one passage. Oh, there's several. Revelation 20, we need to discuss verses 7 through 9. Let's go there for the rest of our time this evening, and let's look at a few things. But we also need to discuss 2 Thessalonians 2, verses 1 through 12. We also need to discuss Matthew 24, the first 35 verses or so. We need to discuss 1 Timothy 4, at least verse 1 and 2. And we need to discuss 2 Timothy 3, verses 1 through 9. So we need to get these 5 passages of Scripture laid out in the beginning as we talk about some events that lead up to the second coming. But for tonight, for this evening, I just want to look at Revelation 20, verses 7 through 9. Can I read them together? Revelation 20, verse 7. I'm reading English Standard Version. And when the 1,000 years were ended, there's your millennial idea. We'll get to that later. Satan will be released from his prison. So in other words, Satan's going to go on parole, right? Who's going to allow Satan to go on parole? The only answer is God. So what does that mean? That means that God is still in control, right? Because if Satan was not allowed to be released, then he would not be released. Now, I'm not going to make a big deal out of the 1,000 years right now. We'll discuss that in greater detail in the millennial discussion in a few weeks. But the point is that there was a period of time, okay, and it had ended. To be contrast with, go back to verse 3, the 1,000 years were ended, and after that he would be released for a little while. So the 1,000 years versus a little while, okay, so a long time versus a short time, okay. Enough said about the timing. The point is there was a long period of time that had come to an end. And then there was going to be a short period of time by which Satan was going to be released. And here's what he's going to do when he's released, verse 8. He's going to come out and deceive the nations that are on the 4 corners of the earth. Gog being the son of Joel, First Chronicles 5, and Magog being the son of Jephthah, Genesis 10 and verse 2. And so we have 2 predominant figures here, maybe even idols, maybe even gods with little g, to gather them for battle. So he's going to come out to the 4 corners of the earth. Okay, we're going to get all sides, if you will, north, south, east, and west. We're going to get 2 prominent wicked or evil figures, okay, to gather for battle, and their number is going to be like the sand of the sea. In other words, we've got a mighty army here. And they're going to march over the broad plain of the earth and surround, notice what they're going to surround, the camp of the saints and the beloved city. Well, the camp of the saints, where is that? Or the beloved city? Well, we're talking about Jerusalem, right? Well, we don't know if we really are or not. But what we do know is that they are going to come in and they are going to surround. So there's going to be a desire to conquer the saints or those that are living in the holy, beloved city. Satan is going to be the leader of an army. But now notice what happens at the end of verse 5. Fire comes down from heaven and consumes them. Wasn't much of a battle there, was there? You see, if we go back to Revelation 16 and we get this idea of the Battle of Armageddon, well, then they would tie in Revelation 20 and they say, okay, here's the Battle of Armageddon. Well, verse 9, I would just say, as Kaufman has said, not much of a battle, is it? I mean, God just kind of says, poof. So what we need to understand is that there are events that are going to lead up to the second coming, okay? In those events, Satan is going to be released, allowed to be loosened by God. But God is still in control. He is allowing this, but evil is going to gather its armies. And evil is going to surround the righteous. But in so doing, God is still in control in that fire is going to come down from heaven and consume. Go back to 1 John, and our time is quickly running out here. But let's just look at a few passages that connect to this. 1 John 2. Oh, let's go to verse 18. Children, it is the last hour, as you have heard, that Antichrist is coming. So now, many Antichrists have come. Therefore, we know that this is the last hour. John, writing to his audience, says, we're in the last hour and many Antichrists. We want to know who the Antichrist is. John says there are many of them. And Revelation 20 and verse 9 says, Satan's gathering the army of Antichrist. Anything, anyone, anybody that is against Christ is an Antichrist. And so they're gathering up, and John describes that as the last hour to his audience hundreds of years ago. So I would suggest to you that we're still in the last hour. Yes. And there is Antichrist. Yes. And they are gathered around, surrounding the righteous. Yes. And God is allowing this to happen because He's loosed the restraint of Satan for a little while, in contrast to the long time that He had him before and to the long time of eternity that He'll have him after the end of time. And so is all of this going on? Sure. But then what kind of battle is it? I mean, God's sending down fire from heaven and He's consuming them. Look at verse 22 of 1 John 2. Who is a liar? But he who denies Jesus is the Christ. That is the Antichrist. He who denies the Father and the Son. Don't make a big, it's the one who denies. John tells us who the Antichrist is. Chapter 4 and verse 3. And every spirit that does not confess Jesus is not from God. This is the spirit of the Antichrist, which you heard and is now coming into the world already. John says they're already here. You see, we want to make a big deal about, well, this is happening and that's happening, and evil's getting worse and darkness is getting darker and evil's multiplying and we must be in the last times. We must be in the end times. We must be getting closer. Here's what I know. We're a day closer to eternity than we were yesterday. You're as close as you have ever been to the end of time. And you are closer now than you were when you started watching this video. Now, I'm not trying to be facetious. I'm not trying to be a smart aleck. I'm just simply stating the facts. John says they're already here in his day. Don't read that into our day. They were already there in the first century. In 2 John verse 7, for many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not confess the coming of Jesus Christ in the flesh. Such a one is a deceiver and an antichrist. There you have it. God allows Satan. And you can say, well, He shouldn't allow him. Well, that's His prerogative, not yours. But God allows Satan to be in charge of evil. But there will be a time when no battle, God's going to send down fire from heaven, poof. The events leading up to the end of time. Well, I wish time would allow us to get into 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. I wish time would allow us to get into Revelation 16 tonight. We'll have to hold those for next week. I hope you'll stay with me. I hope you'll find somebody this week who is questioning the end of time, who is questioning the events and the understanding of the Bible. And I hope you'll invite them and share this link with them. Share this video. I hope it'll be something that'll be helpful to all of us. If I don't know, I am humble enough to say I don't know. But I'm also diligent enough to try to study and know what we can know. We miss you. As Joshua says every Sunday night, we love you so much. We can't wait to be together. We can't wait to gather together and to be safe in doing so. But until that time, I hope you'll stay well, stay safe, take care of yourself. If you need anything from the office, 931-851-9181. Call us, let us know. If you have any questions or concerns or anything you'd like to discuss further, call us and let us know. Take care. Hope to see you next Wednesday night. We'll look at 2 Thessalonians 2 and Revelation 16. Look forward to that study together. Take care.